We would like to also thank Egypt, the government, the ambassador, and we wish her health.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm delighted to be here to discuss this important topic with you. Government, NGOs, students, we all have our part to play in tackling climate change. Climate change will affect us all. It's happening now and is destroying countless lives. But what does this mean for Kazakhstan? It means that there will be more severe droughts, increased land degradation, and less water. It means people's livelihoods will suffer and food security will be threatened. In the absence of adaptation measures, spring wheat yields in Kazakhstan are projected to decline by as much as 50% by the 2050s. Temperature rises will accelerate the melting of Kazakhstan's glaciers. Mud flows are expected to increase in frequency by 10 times and pose a threat to 156 towns and cities in Kazakhstan, among them Almaty. Is this a future you want? If not, what will you do to change it? New climate records are broken each year. These are not records that we want to break. Things which once seemed impossible are increasingly becoming our reality. What are we doing globally to address this? Last year, the UK hosted COP26, where countries around the world adopted the Glasgow Climate Pact and agreed to take action to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Countries were called upon to phase down their use of fossil fuels, to establish market mechanisms to incentivise protecting the planet, and to provide finance for increased climate adaptation. We recently concluded discussions at COP27. Important measures were agreed, like the establishment of a loss and damage fund to support developing countries. There was also a focus on climate finance. The UK, amongst others, called for international financial institutions to be reformed to reflect the urgency of climate financing needs. We saw progress on key work programmes launched at Glasgow, including on adaptation, but not enough progress was made. We needed to keep 1.5 degrees alive, but 1.5 is now on life support. The UK will work with partners in 2023 to ensure that momentum on 1.5 is not lost. We all urgently need to close the 2030 emissions gap. International efforts need to be led and transformed by country efforts. The UK has made its own progress and is committed to achieving net zero by 2050. Once a heartland of fossil fuel-based energy and industry, the UK has been transitioning to a green economy. In our cities in the north of England, there used to be coal mines. Now there are biomass-fueled power stations. In 2008, only 6% of the UK's energy came from renewables. Now, over 50% of our electricity is low carbon. Our low carbon economy is currently worth more than £200 billion and will only grow. Together, we can all create a global green economy, which provides opportunities for everyone. But we recognise that we can do more. At COP27, we committed to triple our climate adaptation funding to £1.5 billion by 2025. We announced over £65 million for green tech innovation and clean energy investments, and over £150 million to protect natural habitats. We welcome Kazakhstan's commitment to reach net zero by 2060 and the various climate change measures that they're taking. We look forward to seeing how they will implement their goals. We await their carbon neutrality strategy and revised nationally determined contributions. Ambition is important, but so too are the steps to get there. We will all inherit this future. Let's write a different story. Thank you.
Следующее слово, the next floor is UNDP, representative of the UNDP, Ms. Sergadina.
Добрый день, уважаемые участники. Позвольте от программы развития ООН.
Dear participants, let me on behalf of UNDP welcome you and apologize for not having our representative of the Department of Energy and Environment, Mr. Gumarkulic, but because there are several important events happening at the same time in Astana and Almaty, he couldn't participate. But let me, on behalf of UNDP, thank you for coming here despite the cold weather. And I'd also like to thank online participants who are hearing us now and watching us now. And I'd like to say that this conference is conducted together with the Ministry of Ecology, Geology and Natural Resources and Nazarbayev University on an annual basis. And this year it's the third year. And as it was mentioned, it's become a nice tradition already. You may also notice that this year we decided to have a 2-day conference because the questions of mitigation, adaptation, financial mechanisms, and implementation and other questions are more and more. And framework convention on climate change and the Paris Agreement is coming into active implementation phase. We're also having questions of implementation of mechanisms in the frames of Kyoto Protocol. That's why during these 2 days, I believe participants will be able to hear the latest news on the results of the COP27 of the UNFCCC, which finished its work last month in Sharm el-Sheikh. Also, using that opportunity, we want to present the results of our research work, analytical work, reports that were prepared by our international and national experts in the frames of the climate portfolio of projects that we have. We, as Saule Sabieva has already mentioned from the Ministry of Ecology, UNDP is providing support in preparing and developing the long-term strategy on carbon neutrality. And also our climate project was supporting the development of the updated NDC for the Republic of Kazakhstan. And as it was already mentioned, adaptation questions in Kazakhstan are now entering the systematic level. So we have all of these clauses reflected in legislation already. And the COP27 showed at the global level as well that adaptation measures, vulnerability assessment, and the impact of climate change on economic sectors and livelihoods is becoming more and more relevant. I'd also like to note other projects that UNDP is implementing. This year, we had a wide-scale work conducted on awareness raising, including youth, females, NGOs, and local administrations on the distribution and raising awareness about the SDGs. It's called Stockholm 50+. And there was a team of speakers and experts that visited all regions of the country. And we had a very good national consultations. We've collected and gathered comments, recommendations, suggestions of all citizens of our country, which were then reflected in the national report and then integrated in the global report. And on the 2nd and 3rd of July, all of these conclusions were presented at the global conference. UNDP is also supporting agricultural sector, and in autumn this year, a new project started, and my colleague Solet is manager of that project. The project is called Using NDCs for Achieving Zero Emissions and Sustainable Climate Change in response to emergency climate situation with support of Japanese government. So the support will be provided to small farmers. Their problems will be studied and their needs and opportunities to introduce renewable energy sources like wind farms, solar panels. And another big component is assisting the subordinate organization, KazHydromet, and colleagues tomorrow will talk about this project in more details. UNDP also, in the frames of other project portfolios in all regions, are raising awareness and explain about the opportunities, how to introduce innovative technologies, green technologies, renewable energy sources, promoting questions of using financial mechanisms to support the development of green economies. So together with all national partners, UNDP is continuing to actively cooperate, and hopefully in the future this work will be continued. And today I'd like to wish all of our participants to have success the questions of climate change, understand how to conduct adaptation measures, how to use new mechanisms, new approaches, and new tools that are being developed and adopted at the global level. Thank you very much.
Good morning, and welcome to Nazarbayev University, dear guests. My apologies for showing up a little bit late because I was called to on a conference call. My role today is to try to frame what the climate talks ought to be about, and I will try to add my own reflections. No, this can come later. I will call you when I need it. Okay. So indulge with me. So I think we all know that COP27 in Egypt led to what I would personally consider maybe some marginal results. The good news is that obviously for the first time really loss and damage has been recognized, and so sort of the idea, okay, we need to find a way to compensate for loss and damage in the whole process of adaptation has been recognized. But of course, a big challenge is who's going to pay for it. And nobody has come up with any real binding commitments. And this at the time when, as was already partly mentioned, globally finances are almost at the brink. We know that most of the countries are edging towards a recession, possibly. There is a huge debt overhang looming, productivity stagnating, and many economists project a major recession. And in all this, it's going to be very difficult to get anybody to commit any real binding solutions. Having said that, I think if you look back at sort of our modern history, actually this Sunday, I think we're going to celebrate 25 years of the Kyoto Protocol. And I think some of you may not have been born at that time. Yeah. So, Kyoto Protocol was in a way the first sort of binding attempt to create a binding international agreement to get countries to commit themselves legally to either capping or reducing their emissions. And this followed actually on the footsteps a decade ago of something that was very successful. And the successful part was the Montreal Protocol, which, addressed the issue of ozone depleting material. The problem, the big difference was ozone depleting things such as fluor and other things are targeting just one single substance. Whereas, starting with Kyoto Protocol, the idea was to target the whole range of substances and commit basically countries to cap, reduce over time the greenhouse gas emissions. This proved very, very difficult. The idea was good, but in the end, for instance, the major emitter, US, never signed up to it. It bound basically developed countries, but in the meantime, countries such as China, also India, developing countries at that time, so-called developing countries, started to become major emitters, and they were not really bound. It also allowed countries to simply opt out of the protocol, such as Canada, without any penalty. So Kyoto Protocol, although it started to introduce market-based mechanisms, it never really, such as trading mechanisms, it never really was successful enough to make a real difference. But the thinking started to evolve, and I think that all led to, what also speakers have referred to COP21 in Paris, and for the first time, really, we saw the major emitters, US and China, cooperating and coming up with something that resembled a legally binding agreement. Everybody started to talk about how we're going to have to seriously deal with it. And what it brought about was two key elements, I think, the COP21 in Paris. One was clarity. So I think in the run-up to the Paris conference, things became very clear. What was the target? The target was to keep the increase in temperature, global temperature, hopefully 5% by the end of the century. Now we've just heard that actually this 1.5% is on life support. Most people think that it will be already a heroic task if we can keep it to less than 2. The current trajectory, unfortunately, is way beyond 2 degrees. And if what recent reports indicate, we go to about 2.5, 2.7, God forbid, 2.9 degrees, large parts of our planet are going to be uninhabitable. And that means for a large part of mankind, it's going to be the end. So we know that we have our work cut out. And the question is there political will? And this leads me to talk a little bit about, and you see here on the screen, it's a title of a book called If Nietzsche Were a Narwhal. It's by a psychologist who also observes, quite knowledgeable in climate change issues as well. And he basically pointed out in this book that, human beings indeed through evolution have become very exceptional compared with other mammals. What's the real exceptional part? Well, other mammals with big brains and so, they all have an ability actually to, for instance, elephants, apes and others, actually when they feel sick, they do self-medicate. They know what they need to do to get well, more or less. Okay? Human beings not only think about it, but they also think why, and try to develop, causal relationships, care about it, and causal relationships then lead to new discovery of new technologies and new drugs and whatever. Okay? That certainly is a sort of and in academia, in universities, our place, we call it maybe critical thinking. That's what we teach. But there are also other parts of the human that sets human beings apart. And that is that we are maybe the only mammal species that actually has a time context and thinks about the future. We think about the future. Climate change issues, a good example of how we think about the future and how we think about the detrimental impact of technology also. But the paradox is, according to this author, humankind is also the only species that thinks that way, but doesn't do anything about it. And this is what he calls prognostic myopia. You know, prognostic, time dimension to the future, but it's very myopic. Basically, we don't care about the future. And it manifests itself in very simple things like, okay, we have students here. You all know maybe that tomorrow we have a big exam. What do you do the night before? Boys tend to do video games, or you go out, have a good time. You know that you should not stay up too late, yet you do it. I did it myself, so I know. And so on. And in the end, we do tend to talk about, okay, economists put it in more elegant phrases, and we may say the time preference, you know, for the discount rate of time is very high. So we have a clear preference for today over tomorrow, while we also say, oh, we have to care about our future generation. But the fact is, we don't care that much. And recently I had a talk with students in the context of our Sustainable Development Support Network initiative. And I really felt I needed to apologize. And that's my apology to all of your generation, that you all have to shoulder the burden of what our generation has actually created. And so it does strike a particular chord with me. And I hope that we are going to be able to really address, as part of our climate talks, also the important part of what, in a way I phrased it, political will, but actually it is really whether our current generation is really able to commit itself to care about the future. Okay. Now, finally, let me, we are at Nazarbayev University, and we have a few of our guests here. I just wanted to come up with, nevertheless, some benchmarkings and metrics. So this one here shows all our, research publications ever since we were created. Okay, from 2011 onwards, and you see that by now we have about 6,124. Others say 6,200. Never really exact publication. And during this whole period, Kazakhstan produced about 38,000 research publications. Okay, so we account for about 1/6 of it. But then, when we look at Q1 journal publications, that's the top quarter publications, we account for 2,540 out of 6,900 publications during that same period. So Nazarbayev University alone accounts for close to 35% of the publications. So far, so good. And this is something what we pay attention to. It's called field-weighted citation impact. Means how often our research publications are cited by others, and field-weighted because not all disciplines have the same frequency and so on. So you weight it, and there we are at 1.55 this year alone. Means what it means is global average would be 1.0. 1.55 is 50% above what normally would expect to be cited. So we are on a good track. Actually, but this is not our goal. By 2030, our goal is firmly to actually reach 2.0 and above, which would put us in the top ranks of international universities. For comparison, Kazakhstan's universities overall are at 0.99, so very close to global average, and there's been a lot of effort that has been made. Here, something about talk about climate change, but a little bit in the broader context. Our university has been, we just looked it up, been quite active also in research areas, publications that address SDGs, Sustainable Development Goal issues. So overall, we have been producing about 2,130 publications. So a good more than 30%, 32% of all our publications cover one way or the other SDG. But if you look at, in particular, SDG 7, which relates to affordable energy and clean energy, change, industry, innovation, infrastructure, which is also linked to climate change, and sustainable cities, also together with climate action. Actually, the number jumps to about, I mean, as a share of the 2,130 is about 860 to close to 900. So it actually means that close to 40%, around 40% of all our publications actually do touch upon climate action issues. So in a way, I'm very pleased that without any prodding, actually, our researchers have really taken up the mantle of taken up this challenge. I had one slide, but it disappeared, so you have to cope with it. So thank you very much. So I just want to say that to all our distinguished guests, that Nazarbayev University definitely is committed through our research community, but through our students and through our service to community to further the goal of sustainable development, and in particular to support the important task of energy. Thank you very much, and let's have a great time.